The vital work of hundreds of LGBT nonprofits depends upon the work of our next guest. Please meet Roger Doughty, Executive Director of the Horizons Foundation. Roger, welcome.
Hi, thank you, David, very much for having me.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Horizons was the first LGBT funding organization or foundation, correct?
It was the very first community-based foundation that was founded in the U.S. The Estrella Foundation, which is an international lesbian-focused foundation, was founded 3 years before in 1977 in New York. And we've been colleagues all along the road.
Right. And for the uninitiated, tell us, what does Horizons do?
Well, a community foundation is set up to gather resources from various parts of a community, be it a geographic community or an LGBT community or a Latino community, and then use those resources to support activities, organizations, campaigns, projects that are for the good of that community. So in essence, what Horizons does is we fuel the LGBT movement. And the way in which we do that, there are two ways that have been with us really since the very, very beginning. And that is, first, we make contributions through the form of grants and other project support to LGBT organizations so that they can carry on their good work. So we strengthen organizations. The second thing we do is to work to increase the amount of resources that are available to all these organizations, be they advocacy groups, health groups, theater groups, so that they have the kind of financial resources that they need. So we work directly with donors, and we work to increase the amount of giving in our community, and we also work in the philanthropic sector among the world of mainstream foundations, so non-LGBT foundations that historically have supported LGBT causes at a very low rate. So we serve as an advocate.
Right.
So we're a voice within that, both nationally and on a local level.
So I'm LGBT nonprofit A.
Yeah.
And I've just started, and I have a mission statement that I feel serves the LGBT community, and I need money.
Yeah.
So I come to you and say, Horizons Foundation, give me $100,000. Is that the way it works?
Well, it certainly does. People do that.
Yeah.
They do that. And actually, we often think of ourselves and talk of ourselves as the funder of first and last resort for LGBT causes. If we go back all the way to the beginning for a moment, back in 1980, which was when Horizons was founded, and that was a time, as you know, when there was just so much that was changing, that was in ferment in San Francisco. We still had thousands and thousands of LGBT folks moving to town. It was just after Harvey Milk's rise and assassination, and just before the epidemic.
AIDS crisis, yes.
Right, exactly. And so many, many things were being founded, and they were growing from volunteer efforts, in particular, very few paid organizations. And Horizons Foundation itself started as a volunteer effort, and it was the child of the Golden Gate Business Association, which has a long history and still exists today. And so it was founded originally as the GGBA Foundation, and then it became independent as Horizons back in '86, '87.
Now, besides funding good gay causes, as I said in the lead-in, how do you get your money to fund those causes?
We get it from a variety of different sources, and I'll break it down into three main areas. The first is that we get support from individuals, so individual donors who support us through a whole variety of different means. Second area is through institutions. So that would be corporations. So we enjoy some corporate support. And then also with foundations that are mainstream foundations. And so some of them support Horizons directly, but what we do mostly with those big mainstream foundations, and these are foundations with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in assets. And so they have a lot of money to give away. Our goal in that world is to advocate to bring more of that money into our community.
Right.
So the way that often works is that a foundation, and I'll give you a concrete example, when we worked with a foundation called the California Wellness Foundation, which is a large healthcare conversion foundation, assets of over $1 billion, they've had an interest in doing work with LGBT seniors, with seniors generally, for many years, but they never funded anything LGBT. So we worked with them to convince them to make what ultimately was $1 million grant to Horizons over the course of several years, which we then turned around and figured out, okay, what organizations in our community here in the Bay Area are going to best be able to use those funds.
So something, I don't know if this was the grantee, but an organization such as Open House, which works with LGBT seniors, is able to, through Horizons Foundation, get money that a mainstream organization would have said, well, we work with seniors, but we never thought about LGBT
That's
seniors
exactly
before.
Right. That's exactly. And not only have we never thought about it, we big foundation, but we don't have the expertise. We don't actually know what to do with it. But with Horizons as a partner, that makes it much easier for them to say, oh, you guys are the experts in this. Here, take this big chunk of money. You go decide who's going to use it best, and then, of course, report back to us and tell us what you did.
Right. You know, for a long time there was, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, the stereotype of a philanthropist is the heir of a wealthy fortune, you know, on the East Coast, you know, Boston Brahmin sort of thing.
Right.
How do you teach philanthropy? And did the LGBT community need to learn philanthropy as part of its coming out process?
That's actually very, very well stated. And yes, the stereotype image that you mentioned is very true, and it still exists. And there are, of course, West Coast versions of that as well. And that is one of the big sources of what we call private philanthropy. Community philanthropy, which is what we are involved in, is rather a different animal, because that's based not on a gift generally left as a testamentary, as a legacy gift after death from one individual or a family that has tremendous resources, but rather we gather the funds from many, many, many different people. But back to your question about is philanthropy part of our coming out process, I think that's absolutely true. And the way that we at Horizons see giving, and I think many people in the community experience giving, it's part of how I experience giving as a donor myself, both to gay and to non-gay causes, is that it's a form of participating. It's a form of saying, I'm taking ownership of this community. I'm going to contribute to it. And anyone who has been involved in a campaign or has been committed to something knows that it can be tremendously powerful. And I often think of all the people who don't give about how much they're missing out on. Now, some of them, of course, don't have the means to, but for many, it's a choice for one reason or another. And I wish they could experience just how wonderful and empowering and fulfilling even the simple act of writing a check can be.
Right. I mean, there's that old biblical story of the widow's mite. You know, her giving her one mite was more than the millionaire giving his $1 million because it was all she had. The reason I said that was because, you know, the difference between 1980 and 2012 is vast. It seems to get vaster, if that's a word, all the time. But now that there is a generation of people for whom coming out doesn't seem as much of a struggle as it was for people, say, in my generation, I'm wondering, now since we don't have to teach as much of the lessons of coming out, do we have to teach how to give money, that we still need money for good gay causes?
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right about that, because one thing that we don't have is we all come into our community. We come out, of course, but we come into what sometimes can be referred to as, you know, our tribe. And that's something that we're not born into, the way that people are born into other communities. And I will just use momentarily the Jewish community as an example, because they have such a stellar capacity in terms of philanthropy in that community, that from birth, those children are imbued with an ethic of philanthropy and of giving and
it's
participating.
Part of the culture.
Precisely. We don't get our kids from birth 99% of the time. You know, it's when people are now in their teenage years, but in our generation, it was more likely it would be, you know, college years or even after that in many cases. And so teaching the value of philanthropy and the use of it is something that for many people, that's not their first priority.
Right. In our last few moments, talk to me about advice you would give someone who's thinking, I would like to learn more about how to become part of a gay philanthropic effort. What are the first steps? What do they do? And where would they go online to find information about you?
Well, going online is a great way to go. And they could just go to our website, which is horizonsfoundation.org, and they'll find a variety of resources there about organizations, about ways to give, because there are all kinds of different ways to give, which have different tax consequences, which have different opportunities that are available for donors. We have different people giving in groups so that they have that experience together as individuals, online, establishing certain funds. So there's many, many ways to do it. We also publish something which you can get on our website, which is called the Q Giving Guide. And we have it inserted into the December issue of the Bay Area Reporter every year. And the purpose of that is to provide a simple directory with a simple description and then a web link for all of the LGBTQ organizations in the Bay Area, so that people who frequently say, I want to give, but I don't know what to give to.
Don't know what to give and how much
Here
to
it
give.
is.
Right.
Here it is. And we provide counsel and advice to donors, whether or not they make gifts to Horizons itself. We don't charge for that service. That's part of why we are there. So if people say, you know what, I'm interested in LGBT senior issues, or I'm interested in LGBT youth issues, or I want to fund something that's in the lesbian health arena, and I've been funding Lion Martin, and I want to continue doing that, but I want to look at other things, we love to do that. We love to be able to help people marry their passion with opportunities and needs that exist in the community.
Thanks so much for your work.
Thank you, David.
Next up, our conversation with Jason Leroy. He's going to talk to us about who's in and who's out in Hollywood on Oscar night, and we'll also ask him what he thought about Jodie Foster's coming out. We'll be right back.